So this Boogaloo Boy comes on my show and he tells people that the Boogaloo Boys were invented as a response to the Proud Boys. They're not Proud. So people would conflate Boogaloo Boys and Proud Boys.
Because the media lies.
And that's right. And so the Boogaloo Boys were actually people who were seeking common ground. They were pro-Black Lives Matter. They were anti-war. They were...
No, you spoke to one specific Boogaloo Boy without doing any research on the organization and the fact that there are a large section of Boogaloo Boys who are in fact white supremacists and are trying to enact a race war. That's the purpose of the entire organization.
I'm all about like retribution and like making the swastika great again, you know, the wheel of life that the Nazis ripped off.
What did you just say, Moonlord? What the I'm all for making the swastika great again? Moonlord, what? That's not what restorative justice is. Jesus Christ.
I already mentioned, joining us tonight to talk about this and so much more is Jimmy Dore.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Who are you, sir?
Who am I? I am a white supremacist Trumper who likes to spread conspiracy theories.
They're going to put that in a bunch of articles now.
I know.
They're going to say he's a self-admitted, blah, blah. Yeah.
So now I've considered myself to way to the left of the Democratic Party. I'm to the left of Bernie Sanders. I'm to the left of AOC and the Squad. And for that, you get called a right-winger. And you get called a white supremacist. And you get called all kinds of smear words because you're exposing the establishment. You're exposing the game, that there really is only one party. We have a uniparty because, as Ralph Nader said 20 years ago, the only difference between a Democrat and a Republican is how fast their knee hits the ground when a donor enters the room.
Wow.
And so this is the world we're living in, right? The stuff that we were supposed to be afraid of Donald Trump doing, Joe Biden is doing, and the corporate media gets America to cheer it on because they don't know they're the most propagandized people in the entire world.
So I really want to talk to you about this because you used to work with the Young Turks.
Yes.
You work there. I mean, I've only had a few experiences with them. I don't really care to talk about them for who they are, but as kind of the symbol of the independent media space and how these people basically went in the same direction of the corporate press, I think is fascinating, considering they call you right-wing, they call me right-wing for simply saying, hey, that thing you're pushing about Trump was not true. Not that we're like saying he's the greatest guy ever, although I've praised the guy in later years, but early on, I'd rag on the guy, but be like, hey, those are lies, and they would say,
why would you ever praise Trump? You don't got to give it to the guy at any point.
you're right-wing now. Yeah. So we'll save it. We'll get into all of that. This is going to be a whole lot of fun, Jimmy.
Okay.
It's so exciting to have you.
Actually, you know what? I will correct myself. Withdrawing from Afghanistan. That's about the only thing I can truly give to Trump.
Here, and I just want to mention for everybody, there was a period where we were briefly neighbors.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
We grew up in the same neighborhood in southwest side of Chicago.
Yeah, you lived like 3 blocks away from me, but I think I was like 4 or 5 years old when you bounced.
Yeah, so I'm quite older than you. And so Vidham Park, we both grew up and
What a crazy story.
Yeah.
I think you asked me like, where are you from? I was like, Chicago. You're like, yeah, me too. Where? I was like, oh, by Midway. And you're like, yeah, me too. And I was like, what street? And I gave you the street. You're like,
oh, there's lore. I didn't know they were just frenzies from back in the day. Oh,
I was right on the street.
2 blocks away from each other.
Away. That's crazy.
That is crazy.
But I wonder if that's why there's some similarity in our views, in that Chicago doesn't have a Republican right-wing base. So if you are more moderate if you're more honest, I suppose, they'll call you right-wing. So let's talk about it. Let's save it. Do the intros.
Okay.
So we've got Hannah Claire Brimelow hanging out.
Hi, I'm Hannah Claire Brimelow. I'm a writer for Timcast.com. You should follow.
We were just getting too deep into it. All right. Well, let's get there.
Gonna throw everybody down a flight of stairs.
Oh, this first story is pretty wild. So Chris Cuomo basically came back and was like, released a statement in which he's like, yeah, I was just so devastated. I wanted to kill everyone or something like that. And you're like, wait, what?
Fired from CNN. Things can consume you. He says, I had to accept the CNN termination because I was going to kill everybody, including myself. Things can consume you. Now, the first thing...
Gonna throw everybody down a flight of stairs.
Well, so look, my first assumption is it's a turn of phrase. He means like, oh, I'm going to show them. He's not literally saying it. But then when he said, including myself, I'm like, okay, he's actually talking about seriously hurting people because he got fired. Jimmy is just laughing.
I remember when Chris came out of the basement when they said, I've been, and his son, and he starts lying. He's like, I haven't even left the house in however long. And his son's like watching him lie right in front of his face. I would imagine that would make someone depressed to have to lie in front of your son.
So Tim, if you or I launched a news report as fallacious as Chris Cuomo's basement exit, we would be laughed out of the business forever. Like that's the thing people pretend you and I do. And
you guys have done a ton of wild things. Fair enough. You haven't said that you will kill yourself and then kill everyone else. That's definitely a Chris Cuomo thing. That one is true. But you have both made a lot of really wild statements.
That's the stuff that CNN actually does on the regular. He did a complete fake phony thing that he was staying in his basement because of COVID. It turned out he was out of his house all the time. He got into a fight with some guy on his front lawn.
And a different property.
Yeah, at a different property.
Yeah, I got to admit, that is very, very weird. That you did this whole thing. I remember that. That was like a big moment. It's like, he's about to surface. It's like, today's the day, everyone. I'm very excited. I'm going to be finally coming out of this basement. It's been very difficult, and thank you for all your thoughts, prayers, and kind words, and I'm really happy to do this. This is the first contact I've made with my wife. And then you like gets upstairs, and all of a sudden it's like, oh God, it was so hard down there. You know, it's like, wait, none of that happened? That was just when the cameras were on. It's like, all right, thanks. Bye, Bob. Bye, Bill. Just walk right back upstairs. Hey, I'm heading to the bar. You're going to the bar. You shouldn't do that. I mean, this segment, it's not fully aired yet. Just wait. Can you wait 1 week? Nah, I'm going to the bar. I gotta drink.
And then when he comes out of the basement, his family's sitting around there going, yeah, they're all going along with the lie, as if he just came out for the first time. It gets revealed that's a lie. It's nothing, like a blip. It's like a chemical fire in Palestine, Ohio. Nobody knows about it.
That's right.
Yeah, the Palestinians, they tend to get a bad rep.
Palestinians.
The nation's best kept secret.
Oh my God, I was like, that's such a low-hanging fruit joke that you're probably going to see some right-wing, like fucking, what's his face, Rakita Law or whatever style, like boomer dad, you know, say, and then there it is. It is Moonlord of all people.
Palestinians, I guess you would call it. Yeah, and honestly, that Chris Cuomo video, everyone should check that out again for reference at some point, because you got to see his son's face while he's lying.
His son knows he's lying. His son knows he's lying on television. And to do that to your kid, right? That's child abuse. That's psychological torture to that kid. And now his kid knows the news is fake. Everything's fake.
He said his kids call him fake news. Remember he told that story? I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I'm just going to skip this because I think for the most part, there's not much I'm going to be pushing back on if they're just going to be making fun of Chris Cuomo and CNN.
And if you do, it's like you're one of them. So everything, you're either with us or against us. It's very tribal thinking.
Hey, Lost, good to see you. Tanchi, bonsoir.
And it leads to the country we have, where half the country can't afford a $500 emergency and people are living under every bridge. And we still are told to hate our neighbor. We're told that our neighbor is the cause of our problem, even though the establishment did a controlled demolition of our economy, which crushed everybody except for a handful of millionaires. And they want me to be angry because of the pain I'm feeling. I'm going to be angry at my neighbor because he wouldn't take a vaccine that didn't work the way they said it did in the first place. And so I'm not going to...
Absolutely did. The numbers speak for themselves. He was doing this really fucked up shit yesterday where he was talking about how no one should vaccinate their children because children have a 0% chance of dying from COVID. They've lied to you. And then you're like, that doesn't sound right. What's Google say? Oh, studies reports. Turns out it's the 8th leading cause of death. The 8th leading cause of death of kids. And someone points that out to Jimmy. And then right away online, he's like, the 7th leading cause is pizza. I'm like, you fucking disgusting ghoul. Jesus Christ. Like, just because it's 1% or less, that's still hundreds of thousands of dead kids. And for you to spew this ascientific nonsense because it's helping your bottom line, that's disgusting.
Blame my neighbor for that. What I'm going to do is love my neighbor, and I'm going to find common ground with my neighbor because we have it. And that's what scares the hell out of the oligarchy, is that if we come together and realize we have a common enemy, it's like...
No, the oligarchy is not deadly terrified of there being suddenly a unity of people against vaccine precautions or mandates. That's not what they're scared of every single day. They're like, oh, yes, it's fantastic being the bourgeoisie. Oh, yes, we do enjoy being the bourgeoisie, don't we? But what if they find out that these vaccine mandates are, in fact, just a ruse to keep them indoors for reasons? You say, do you believe it does hurt our bottom line? Ultimately, it would be much better if people were healthy and working in the factories, making the things that we want them to sell. That would help us, make us much more money to be able to buy the things that, again, we're making and make us even more money. That would be better. But in this case, yes, no, you're right. It's the lockups. That's going to destroy us. The plan is perfect. Release the Chinese virus. Tell the billionaires over there we're prepared. I don't know why Churchill's involved.
We're going to do on Sunday at this anti-war rally. People of all political stripes are coming together to oppose the military-industrial complex, which has been fleecing this country for at least the last 30 years.
What is this rally specifically? Is it about Ukraine?
At least the last 30 years. We don't have the math on this, but...
The vaccine is safe and effective, and it certainly does slow the transmission and contraction. It'll keep you from getting seriously ill or hospitalized.
And talk to a doctor about what's right for you.
Talk to a doctor about what's
sponsored by...
Yes, actually. Yeah, I know the bit. I know what you're doing. But, actually, though. That's the reality of the world. Again, you're peddling shit that's killing your own audiences. It's just it's wild how blatant it is that y'all don't care. Some may die. The weak ones.
Fill in the blank.
No, in all seriousness, talk to a doctor.
And the vaccine is so good, my heart swells with pride.
You got the vaccine
with pride, yes.
And you got it. You told me you got injured
I did get a vaccine injury, and that's what led to me becoming
that like woke you up or
pariah.
whatever.
Are you public about? Have you
Oh
been
my
public
God.
about the whole process and like what
Oh,
happened?
the
and
whole
everything?
thing. Yeah, I talked all about it.
What happened?
And so I just
He told a story on Joe Rogan. It's like, I took it and then, oh my God, I was so sore and tired and I couldn't believe I was having these effects. Oh, weird. The very effects they tell you could experience when they give you the vaccine. This could make your arms sore and tired. Certain people have different reactions. Some people don't have very big a reaction at all. Depends on the vaccine, the person. I've been vaccinated 4 different times now, and by a variety of different vaccines. Some of them did absolutely nothing to me. I just went up and I worked the next day, and one of the ones made me feel tired, lethargic, and slow, and it was not fun. It's better than what it seems like happens to people who are unvaccinated and experience really bad symptoms of COVID or long COVID. There are people who just like lose their sense of taste. Like that never happened to me. I've had it twice now, well vaccinated, and it was relatively manageable.
got sick and I couldn't get better. I had.
Why don't we talk about this
on the later?
We'll go deep
yeah,
on it. Yeah, we go deep later.
We'll go deep on this
We'll
one
go deep
because
on it.
I
Go
think
deep.
if
Yeah,
I think
off.
much to the disappointment of many people, but I think if we really want to go crank it up to 11,
Gotta go
we'll
on-
talk over at
Okay.
Gotta go
Timcast.com,
hard on
if you
Rumble.
remember.
Let's do that.
You know what's wild? It's just like that they're just straight up saying, hey, if we want to lie and spread dangerous vaccine misinformation, come on down. Come on, give us some money, obviously, because you got to pay for that subscription. But hey, if you want to be fooled, come.
And for now, I think that story in and of itself is interesting. So we'll cruise back to 30,000 feet, and I'll ask you: this is what snapped you out of it, or like made you realize the media is lying, or what?
You mean about COVID?
Well, like what was your moment where you were like, holy crap, these people are full of it? I mean, you probably always felt that about the corporate press.
Well, I've always felt that about the corporate press, but then I didn't understand was what happened with Trump, is that people like, and it wasn't just TYT, but that was the people I was a part of, right? And they just became the opposite of what they're supposed to be, right? They're supposed to push back against the corporate narrative, even when if it's somebody that they hate against Trump, you're supposed to tell the truth, and they wouldn't do it. And
Look, I'm not here to endorse liberal takes that TYT can have, but like, it's not just opposing corporations blank. That's like, it's not like just opposing industry or just opposing their very existence or just opposing factories or just opposing this. It's like that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to just hate Pfizer for all reasons. Well, what are the reasons? There are legitimate reasons to hate Pfizer. I could list them for you. No. You just hate them because 5G they're poisoning us. They're making our hearts explode for profit. They're a really evil company. That's how they profit. It's like, what's wild? They don't have to do that to be an evil company that profits. They don't have to make people's hearts explode and their brains turn to goo. They can make tons and tons of profit and not do that. They can actually make a product that works. They can get government funding to do it, and then they can sell that product once they manufacture it back to the people that have to take it. They can just fucking print cash. That's all they need to do. It's more like they're profiting off of our, let's just say, healthcare. That's it. And that's something that maybe should be nationalized and discussed about that. But it's not just you should hate them because you should hate them.
they just kept repeating CIA and FBI talking points about everything, including Julian Assange, which was disgusting. As they were, I'm debunking the bullshit articles about Julian Assange and Paul Manafort visiting him at the embassy in London, even though they don't have any pictures of it. I'm debunking that in their studio. They come on after me and they push
This has a lot to do with vaccines.
So you're at the Young Turks and you're like, this is a lie. And then 20 minutes later, they're like, actually, it's true.
No, this is 100% true. And I couldn't, my jaw was on.
Is this the thing amongst all the conspiratorial grifters that they can't keep track of a coherent thought? It's like you start somewhere, and then by the end of the sentence, all of a sudden, we're hearing about something completely different. And that's why Julian Assange and Paul Manafort and blah, blah, blah. What were we talking about? Oh, yeah, my trip to Disneyland. I should call it Groomerland.
On the floor when they did that.
How did you get involved with the Young Turks?
Oh, well, I had an hour's Comedy Central special called Citizen Jimmy, which was chosen Best of the Year by iTunes. Thank you very much. And the reason why I tell you that is because if I don't, nobody will. So they saw it. Somebody who worked there saw it. And when Cenk got his job at MSNBC, he was a host on MSNBC, they needed guest hosts. And so they called me in and they said, hey, you're a political comedian. You had a political comedy special. Would you like to host? Well, I was ready, right? Because I had been doing my live Jimmy at Dore show it was called Pop and Politics back then, at the UCB Theater in Hollywood. And so I was doing video work and I knew how I had, so I was ready. So when they opened the door, I could walk through. And they told me, they said, I'll never forget. They said, don't read the comments because everybody's going to hate you. They only like Cenk. And when I did the show, everybody liked me. And they were like, this is amazing. You should. And that's when they made me a regular host. And the rest is history.
Did you ever ask them why they named the organization after the genocidal Young Turks from the Armenian genocide to basically create
Man, just 0 to 100 with Moonlord these days, eh? He's like, dressed a little bit like Prince, just sitting there in the corner and just like, Have they ever explained themselves as to why this pertains to the genocide of Armenian people? Have they ever taken any accountability for that? Tim Pool's laughing. He's like, no, I'm 100% serious. I'd like to know if they've ever addressed this. Why did they choose that name? I've already explained, by the way, in my documentary that a friend of mine made, known as the Hassanabi Slaughter, that the original name was actually the Young Turkeys. It's a misunderstanding of the original name of the show. That's what TYT actually stood for. It was other people who put in that.
Just drag them
Enver
further.
Pasha and them. Like, why?
I did ask them. They said they were going to call it the Young Pedophiles, and I was like, "That's not a good."
They'd be like calling it
So they settled with the
Nazis. That's
genocidal
crazy.
organization.
No, what I was told which is the public story, that it means that you're a young, like a Turk, meaning
I know, of
rebel.
course, I would
A young
defend my
upstart.
employers.
Yeah, but that literally is a
Right,
reference
thanks
to
to
the
what,
young
185?
And he happens to be from
Generous of
Turkey,
you.
and then he did deny the genocide for a while. He doesn't anymore, but that's why that didn't look good.
I'm sure they're very excited we're talking about this, so it gives them an opportunity to make shock content for their audience.
I'm all about like
But
retribution and like making the swastika great again. You know, the wheel of life
come on.
that the
So,
Nazis
look.
ripped off. But like calling it the Young Turks when they created the Armenian, I don't
here's-
understand.
What did you just say, Moonlord? What the fuck? I'm all for making the swastika great again. Moonlord, what? That's not what restorative justice is. Jesus Christ. You know what's wild? Ever since he said that the whole like spiel about how he thinks that Ye is going to bring Jewish people closer to God, and then afterwards Tim was like, I'm gonna be honest with you, that's the most batshit insane thing you've ever said. Ever since then, I kind of feel like they just want Ian untethered, you know, unsaid. Like they're not really being like, can we cut his fucking mic? Just maybe for like an hour, and then we'll see if he's better when we come back. It's just kind of like, okay, let's go next. he's gonna get cut in and interject with some pretty extreme things, but
Damn that Cenk. Like,
Here's what I think with the Young Turks. I think that you've got young people entering the political sphere with no experience. They don't know who Obama is. They don't know who Joe Biden is. And I mean that in the, not like they've obviously heard the name.
they don't know who Joe Biden is. They don't know. In both cases, you would be very hard-pressed to find a single person who didn't know either. But sorry, he's explaining himself. I'm getting ahead of this. He's obviously describing how they don't know what those people are truly about, right?
Yeah.
But they don't know what they did. And this is a really great example of this is when we had Vosh on the show. I think you know who Vosh is? He said,
some Vosh
when I
level.
asked him, like, don't you know about what Joe Biden did when he was in the Obama administration? I mean, from 08 until 16, he goes, I was in high school. I don't even know anything about that. And well, I don't blame him. This is how the Democrats
Wow, Jimmy, I didn't know you were big onto your Vosh lore here.
operate. They target young people who aren't old enough to know that they're psychotic and evil, and then say we should lower the voting age to 16.
Yeah, I was like, I saw that. I don't
So
remember
for the
him
Young
saying
Turks, what I
that.
think happens is they've got a new, younger audience. They're more woke. They're more leftist. They're very tribal. And if they go the honest route, they're right-wing conservatives now. But there is a faction of liberals who are tribal and have always been and are probably aging with them. So I have to imagine there's a point where Cenk Uygur was sitting in his chair, sweating bullets, thinking to himself, this story's not true, but if I don't say it, we're going to lose all of our members. I have no choice but to say it. And then he does. And that becomes his thing. And I have to imagine it's psychological torture, but he's trapped in that world now. I think that's why he's become so angry and so like, and screaming and yelling, because
That's always been
he
his
knows
persona.
he has to lie to people. There's no way a person who runs a business like he does.
Come on, like, Tim.
And you keep saying, but my kids need food. And now inflation is here, and there's food shortages, and your kids aren't eating, and the schools are indoctrinating your kids.
This election is about the people.
Who reads the news like he does is unaware that he's lying. Because if you take 10 seconds, like I'll give you the example. Donald Trump called white supremacists very fine people. Never happened. I remember I was watching that press conference, and he said they should be condemned totally. And I was like, well, how about that? And then the
No, he said there are some very fine people on both sides. On one of those sides was a whole bunch of tiki torch wielding Nazis that included a whole bunch of people that, you know, are kind of household names today, like Richard Spencer and shit like that. And they eventually killed someone who was counter-protesting. So yeah, those are not fine people. Those are neo-Nazis, white supremacists, white nationalists, Christian nationalists. Like there's a whole bunch of racism up in there. So you shouldn't say fine people on both sides at all. It's not a both sides thing. When one side are Nazis, the other side are anti-Nazi, anti-fascist, fighting white supremacy, fighting racism, fighting oppression, then there's not fine people on both sides. There's oppressor and oppressed and or opposing oppressed. Or opposing
next day, all of a sudden,
oppressor.
they're like, Trump called white supremacists very fine people. And I was like, what? No, he didn't. Someone like Cenk Uygur, Anna Kasparian, if they come out and tell people the truth, like you mentioned with Paul Manafort, they're going to lose money. A lot of it They're going to get attacked. They're going to lose street cred. So they opt for, I'm just going to say what the audience wants to hear. Someone like me, at the time, I said, I'll tell you what's true. It ends up working out for me in the long run. I think.
Which wild is because Tim just says what comes to mind and then never course corrects. That's the whole Tim Pool thing. It's just like whatever's going on up here, he's gonna spew out that, and then it's gonna be like, yeah, so that's why it's actually transphobic if you do gender affirming care. I think, anyways, my story. Like, and then afterwards it's like, so that was completely ascientific. It's not true at all. Every major medical association in the United States agrees upon this. You were lying on air. Are you gonna correct it? Gonna do anything? No, it doesn't matter, because your audience doesn't care if you're right or wrong. They just want you to continuously push this kind of conspiratorial radical agenda.
For you as well. Right now, you've got crossover between people on the left and the right who are like, Jimmy's an honest guy. I either agree with his opinions or I don't, but those people are liars. This guy's honest.
That's right. So I think people are starved for honesty, and so there's a lot of right-wingers or people who can...
For fentanyl smuggling, right? Nazi, the man in the black shirt, one of the most prominent photos from 2017 at the neo-Nazi rally in Charlottesville, killed himself as he was due to face trial for smuggling fentanyl across the southern border.
Consider themselves conservatives, who find my show and they're like, hey, I like this guy. I don't agree with on this, but I like that. And that's how it's supposed to work, Tim. You know that.
Right.
Like, politics is all about finding common ground. Politics is all about convincing people to come to your point of view through the strength of your arguments. That's what politics is all about. And they try to discredit me, the Young Turks, by saying I have a right-wing audience.
Politics
which
is what serving
I'd
the
say it's
people.
pretty mixed audience, but what... They go, half his audience is right wing,
build a
which means half of
society.
it isn't. Which
And
means,
that's a good thing.
Which means I have broad appeal, and they're supposed to make. That's not bad. That's what you're supposed to be going for.
They're bragging about having no conservative viewers.
Yes, they are. And so how are you going to turn anybody?
Jake,
So
I haven't
I
seen
get
it
comments all the time also that I used to think this about that, and now I don't because of Jimmy. I used to think this, but now watching him, I think this. And so I've turned people's opinions on things, which is what you're supposed to do, which is what I want to do with this show, right?
I've got a lot of messages from people saying that I've convinced them to oppose the death penalty because of my stance on
Me
it.
too. I did it to Cenk on air. So that's
You get them to support it or oppose it?
my proudest moment. I swear to God, one of mine. If you can look it up, it's still on YouTube. We were doing some panel and we're talking about the death penalty, and I just very calmly I started to question him about why you're for the death penalty and why it's wrong, and he was all about. It's okay if they get it right, but if they get it wrong, then it's bad. So he's against it because they get it wrong. And I had to tell him, no, just the.
I don't know. Okay, so because it's Jimmy, I have no idea if the story's true. Could be true, right? Like, Cenk does have some pretty sometimes extreme takes where I'm like, whoa, what the fuck? So that could have been a thing in his past. I'm not saying it is or it isn't. I just think, like, we do not have a reliable narrator is the problem.
The idea is wrong. That violence doesn't solve violence. Violence creates more violence. And why do you think when they do it, they don't do it in town square? They do it behind curtains. Because we're not fucking I'm sorry, I keep swearing.
Let it out, brother.
Let it out. I'm not effing.
They used to do it publicly.
Yeah, but they
You're on
stopped,
YouTube.
right? And
You can
so
swear.
Phil Donahue, another guy, used to advocate for doing executions
isn't
in
on
public,
TV.
and they made him think he was crazy. And the reason why he said that was because we want to see what we're doing. You want to see what we're actually doing? Let's take a look at it and let's deal with it.
Like, these motherfuckers are always screaming about not being able to say the N-word, and then meanwhile it's like, oh, by the way, no swears, please. We'd prefer if you not swear on our show. Well, it's just like, you understand how sometimes these words can be offensive to certain people. Our large Christian viewing audience isn't very fond of the naughty words. But, you know, if you want to use the K slur when you're discussing Jewish people, I mean, I'm not going to stop you. I don't want to limit your free speech. Have at it.
Yeah. And then either we keep doing it or we don't. But let's challenge ourselves. Let's not do it in the dark. Let's not have justice. That's not how you serve justice, in the dark behind a curtain.
Let's talk about what it even means to be left and right. This is funny. There's a meme. It said, or it's a Twitter post that went viral. People screenshot it. If you are on the left, and they describe you as a lefty, and you deviate on leftist economic policy, I don't care. That's fine. Okay, whatever. If you deviate in terms of woke ideology, now you're a right winger. It's funny though, because thinking about that, if you're on the right and you lie, you're a liar.
You don't agree with the left on economic policy. You also don't agree with the left on civil rights. In both cases, that's why people describe you as a right winger. You can say that you're a milquetoast fence sitter who voted for Obama, even though, like, we'll see. But at the end of the day, that's just the reality of the situation. That's where your principles lie, Tim. Yes, there's certainly a difference between people who are going to be economically leftist and are going to say, hey, I don't want to have the exploitation of individuals. This is leading to a class stratification, and that class stratification, in combination with capitalism, has resulted in a more, let's just say, more inequality in society, and it's a bad thing. And that there are other vectors of oppression that are reinforced through a lot of different institutions and upheld and accelerated through capitalism. That's a different thing entirely.
Or I should say this, if you lie online, conservatives will call you a liar. If you are on the internet and you are conservative, they will call you a conservative. If you are on the internet and you are a leftist, they will call you a leftist. If you deviate from those opinions, they'll say, hey, your opinion changed. On the left, they'll just say you're right wing, you're right wing, you're right wing, unless you agree.
They keep doing this thing where it's like, oh, well, because of the woke ideology and the purity testing, you're always going to have to obey exactly whatever the woke orthodox, current, like, blah, blah, blah thing is. And it's just getting outrageous and people can't keep up all the time. And, like, honestly, marginalized communities, what they've been asking for has been, hey, can we have these discussions and can you learn some of these things without being defensive all the time? That's been a large part of it. That's what, like, White Fragility, not a great book in terms of talking about race relations, especially. Like, maybe it's a primer white people need. Maybe it's just the little teeny like spoonful of sugar, that makes the liberal go down, or the medicine for the liberal go down, or whatever it is that might be necessary, but you need more than that. Like, and that's one of the problems being that, like, you'll hear the right always be like, it seems like the left are obsessed with race. It seems like black people are obsessed with race. They're always talking about race. And then it's like, well, they're having conversations that they've probably had most of their lives because they are, again, usually racially othered in society, broadly speaking, in one way or another. It could be subtle. It could be things that seem even like cute or charming at the time. Hey, you must be good at basketball. Wow, you've got really nice hair. Can I touch it? Hey, you're a dude. Do you have a massive dick because you're black? Things like this. And then at the time, it's like, well, these are still different forms of othering other people. These are still, no matter what form it comes in, and this is broadly speaking in society going to be lived experience, and I'm just trying to tell you about it. And then on the other end, it's like, well, are you trying to say that I have superpowers because I'm white? Because, I can be white and poor, or I could be white and have a hard time, or I could be white and have like a dead sister and I'm really sad and depressed all the time, or I could be white and be depressed. I could be white and be anxious. I could be white and all these kind of things, and it still is hard. And it's like, yeah, no. I'm not trying to take away from that. That's your truth. That's your life, and that's valid and real. And yeah, a lot of those things are oppressing you. I'm saying some of those things can also oppress me, and at the same time, I can also be racially othered in society. So basically what I'm saying is that when the two of us are besties and we're hanging out and then we're both on drugs and then the cops show up, could you talk to the cops? That's kind of that's the privilege that I'm talking about, because statistically you'll have a higher probability of not dying, not even being arrested really. So that's probably better, right? So do you want to use that, and then we can get back to doing the shroomies? And that's like, yep, sweet. And then there's racial harmony, and then the revolution happens, and then all systems of oppression are abolished. So fantastic.
With us on the tribal ideological issue. But if you could claim to be pro BLM, you could claim to be, in support of trans kids and all that stuff, but question universal health care, and they have no problem with that.
So I interviewed, I don't know if you know, but a big watershed moment at my show was I interviewed a Boogaloo.
Also not true. Like, most leftists will be like, no, we would like to have universal healthcare. Universal healthcare is going to help all groups of people, obviously, and like a rising tide does not lift all boats equally. But I can tell you, one of the reasons that I advocate for universal dental care in Canada is because there are a lot of Indigenous people who cannot receive dental care, obviously due to systemic and institutional racism and poverty. And it would be a really good thing if there was a universal dental program that helped them out. That's one of the reasons. It's not going to solve the problem of racism in Canada. It's not going to get rid of that. It's not overnight. All of a sudden, it's like, oh, well, the oppression of Indigenous people is over. But it's certainly something that's going to be a good positive for everybody. Like, I don't know a single leftist who doesn't advocate for things like Medicare for all in the U.S.
Boy. And now people don't know anything about the Boogaloo Boy. Either did I. That's why I interviewed him. And what I found out was exactly what you just said. So this Boogaloo Boy comes on my show and he tells people that the Boogaloo Boys were invented as a response to the Proud Boys. They're not Proud. So people would conflate Boogaloo Boys and Proud Boys.
Because the media lies.
And that's right. And so the Boogaloo Boys were actually people who were seeking common ground. They were pro-Black Lives Matter. They were anti-war.
No, you spoke to one specific Boogaloo Boy without doing any research on the organization and the fact that there are a large section of Boogaloo Boys who are in fact white supremacists and are trying to enact a race war. That's the purpose of the entire organization. You didn't do that research, and you found an individual who happened to be both LGBTQ plus and a libertarian and a Boogaloo Boy, and so some of the things synced up. You're doing the exact thing you're accusing your enemies of doing right now, by the way. You're like, oh, the leftists require purity testing and woke scolding, and apparently if you don't meet their woke standards at all times, they'll disavow you, blah, blah, blah. They do identity politics, and that's all they think about. They only think about, whether or not you're LGBTQ plus. It's like, well, they told me not to meet with the Boogaloo Boys, but then I found a Boogaloo Boy who's LGBTQ plus, apparently is, anti-cops or something like that. So obviously these are our best friends now, and we should all be besties.
We're anti-cop.
They shake hands with Antifa in a bunch of videos.
Antifa?
They march together.
They march with that. So that's the video I saw.
Isn't that the person that Tim thinks derailed the train in Ohio? Isn't that it was Antifa, right?
this guy Magnus, and he had a Black Lives Matter person with him. He had a gay person with him, and then it was him. And he's a libertarian, and he said, "We seek common ground. We're not your enemy. Our enemy." And I was like, "Let's bring this guy on." I found out he's pro-gay. They provided security for the Black Lives Matter protests, so they're pro-Black Lives Matter, pro-LGBTQ, they're anti-war, anti-cop. What else do you guys? That's 4 or 5 out of the top 10 issues I have.
Well, I guess the race war part is the one that I would be worried about. The part where they're trying to instigate the incoming race war. That part is the yikes, and maybe why we shouldn't align ourselves with, again, these organizations. Doesn't matter if they happen to be white supremacist upholding organizations that have non-white members. It doesn't really confuse me that there are non-white people in the Proud Boys, but it still seems like they align pretty strongly with fascism, or they align with the far right, or they do the heavy lifting for the far. It's why they're not condemned. It's why there's so much cover run for them. Why the fuck would the president of the United States sit down and was like, hey, there is a massive conspiracy theory that is obviously overtaking a lot of parts of America and the rest of the world called QAnon, that is obviously based in a whole bunch of different conspiracy theories, anti-Semitic ones, homophobic ones, anti-LGBTQ plus ones, and they've kind of all combined into one super conspiracy theory that makes you the white savior of mankind. Can you condemn it, please? And the most natural thing in the world, you would think, would be, yes, that's not good. That would be the best possible outcome when you're asked that question. But instead it's like, well, I don't know. I've heard they hunt pedophiles. No one likes pedophiles, so is that really that bad? I don't know a lot about them. I haven't really been told a lot about that. I accept that they do hunt pedophiles. So am I supposed to condemn an organization that is effectively hunting pedophilia by searching in Wayfair cabinets and posting conspiracy theories about Democrats and Hollywood elites drinking adrenochrome children for the glory of the Illuminati? Am I supposed to condemn that outright?
We can agree on, we could work on. They demonize me. Like, you can't do that. That guy's this, he's that. And I'm like, so I literally had a guy come on after I interviewed him from the World Socialist website. And he's supposed to be a union organizer. His name is Jerry something. And I can't remember his last name, and you never heard of it anyway, because this guy's never accomplished a goddamn thing in his life. And he came on and he started to rip me for interviewing that guy. And I go, Jerry, what's your message to that guy? This guy's being affected by the economic crushing from COVID, just like everybody else. What's your message? Don't you have a message to recruit him? Because if you don't have a message, the Nazis are going to have a message. We got to have a message. And he goes, I don't have a message for that guy. And I'm like, well, that's why nobody ever heard of you.
The Nazis,
and that's why you've never accomplished anything in your life, because that's not how you organize. You know how you organize? Just like Christian Smalls did at the Amazon warehouse on Staten Island. Now, if you don't know Staten Island,
you don't get to fucking start to talk about how you're all into labor again when you shit on labor and labor unions all the time if it doesn't fit your narrative. Like, when it's not convenient to you, when all of a sudden it's like, hey, by the way, most major unions in Canada are opposing the trucker occupation, aka the auto occupation by the far right, and the whole thing is being astroturfed to some kind of workers movement. But the workers know, including the truckers, the majority of truckers and trucker unions who oppose it, they know the truth. But at that point, it's like, look at them, they're all traitors to the cause, every single one.
All full of Trump voters, and he's a black guy who organized a union of Trump voters on Staten Island. And how do you do that? Well, I'll tell you how you don't do it. You don't go to the union floor and go, who here's a Proud Boy? You're out. Who's a Boogaloo Boy? You're out. Who doesn't like Social Security? You're out. Who's against LGBT?
Right. Unionization and unionization efforts and workplace power and fucking the entire thing that took place there are different than what you do, Jimmy. You are an entertainer like myself. When you bring people on in a friendly fashion and then you platform them on your massive platform and you downplay the severity of the Boogaloo Boys or supremacist extremist organizations, without doing any research, that's fucked up. These are different things. This is different thing than a workplace being like, all right, we should unionize. Yes, there's not going to be a political ideological test when you're trying to band together in solidarity with your fellow workers. This is 100% different situations.
You're out. Who's a libertarian gun nut? You're out. Okay, who's left? Now let's organize. That's not how you do it. Everybody knows that's not how you organize. The way when people on the left say we're going to organize along class lines, they don't even realize what they're saying, because what that means is organizing with Trumpers. They say we'll never do that. Well, that's what organizing along class lines means, moron. And that's why you haven't accomplished anything in your life except divide the country. Your neighbor's not your enemy. The military-industrial complex is your enemy. Wall Street is your enemy. Big pharma, big insurance, that is your enemy, not your neighbor.
I got a question about the military-industrial complex.
Well,
I'll ask it after this.
Well, no, I wanted to bring that up specifically because I'm curious as to your thoughts on Ukraine as it pertains to the military-industrial complex.
Well, it's amazing how people have no idea what's going on in Ukraine. But what's worse is they have no idea that they have no idea what's going on in Ukraine. And what's going on in Ukraine is a proxy war that we've been planning for years and years to put an economic hurt on Russia. And we've always feared was Russia coming together with Germany. Germany has their technology and they have their capital. And we were always afraid of Germany's technology and capital coming together with Russia's manpower and natural resources. So there they are. They come together. We immediately go into action. We overthrow the Ukrainian government because all the pipelines go through Ukraine. We install a puppet regime, and then they start bombing the Donbass, which is the eastern part, the Russian-speaking part of Ukraine. They bombed it for 8 years straight. But they had a peace agreement called the Minsk Accords that was supposed to stop it. They never abided by it. That was in 2015. They had the Minsk Accords. Why don't they ever abide by that? Nobody ever. So when corporate America media tells the story about Ukraine, they start at Putin's invasion. They don't start with the coup that the CIA and the right-wing Nazis in Ukraine pulled off to overthrow a democratically elected president of Ukraine. And then the people who were the Russian speakers in the eastern part of Ukraine didn't want to go along with a coup government, so they didn't want. So that's when Ukraine starts bombing the hell out of them, and so they killed 16,000 people. So they never talk about this in the corporate media. So and also Ukraine was going to join NATO. They've been threatening to join NATO now. That's a big deal, and everybody's known for decades that if that happened, that would trigger Putin or Russia to do something. Everybody from Chomsky to Henry Kissinger has said that. This is a political reality. This isn't about who's right or wrong, but if we keep expanding NATO, which NATO is no longer a defensive organization, it's an aggressive organization, which is being proven in Ukraine right now. And so when we let Germany unify, they made a promise to the Russians that we wouldn't expand NATO. They've expanded NATO like crazy, all the way up to their border now with Ukraine. And so that is triggering. We wouldn't let Mexico join a military pact with China. Right, and then China starts putting bases in Mexico. We wouldn't let that happen.
Yeah,
that's what we're doing in Ukraine, plus a lot of other things. And this is about so we can sell liquefied natural gas, among other things, to Europe. Russia provided 40%.
It's always good when you get to give it up to Kissinger, Probably one of the greatest war criminals in human history. But it's like, well, we got to give it up to Henry Kissinger after all. I mean, he's speaking truth to power now, so it lines up with what we want to say. First off, I don't think Putin's a rational actor. I disagree with that entirely. In principle. Now, I'm not one of the people who is obviously advocating as a pro-NATO position. That's not me. I am obviously not for an organization that I think has done some pretty shitty things, including what they had done to Libya. But I can also recognize that other nations have sovereignty and other people have agency, and Vladimir Putin certainly does in this case. And if Vladimir Putin is invading a sovereign nation, regardless of what your own fan fiction may be of the reasons, you still should be supporting the people who are being invaded by a foreign power, especially a foreign power that seems very set on colonizing them. That's what's happening here. If you are taking areas that you have bombed and depleted and then being like, well, now we're going to, with the remaining people who feel safe in this environment, hold an election. Yep, it seems like they want to annex and my country gets bigger now. I get more country. That's not the way any of this works. If you are going to stick to your principles and you're going to say, I'm in opposition to the Israeli government destroying and taking the land of Palestinians. I think there should be a right of return, and I think Palestinians should have autonomy and control over their own land and destiny. You can't then apply that same rule and say, well, but it doesn't apply to Ukrainians because they're technically just American puppets. So because of that, it's actually good that Putin's doing this wartimey stuff.
Of the energy to Europe before the Ukraine war, and now the United States wants part of that, and that's what this is all about. So we can sell more, and we're right now selling more liquefied natural gas to Europe, and we also that's why we blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, which nobody will cover, and we blew it up, and they're bragging about what a great opportunity this is. Of course we did that, and why?
Yeah, but things can be simultaneously true, right? It can be kind of fucked up that the military-industrial complex is printing money over this. It can be very fucked up that energy companies are making vast amounts of profits. And these are regardless of political affiliations or ideological lines. If it is an energy company in Russia right now printing cash, energy companies around the world are doing the exact same thing. This is a fantastic time to be in the distribution service of both energy, commodities, and goods. And everyone is just raking in the profits in that process. That is all entirely fucked. That doesn't mean that the struggle of Ukrainians dying in their own homeland is suddenly invalidated. It doesn't mean that you suddenly get to buy into a conspiracy theory that this is one country just cleansing another country of Nazis, because they say that. That's utterly absurd. why do you buy into, again, far right narratives in one end, and then at the same time, be like, the rest of the left can't see this? No one's willing to see any of this. The reality.
Germany will go along with this. You know, Merkel wouldn't go along with that. She pushed on and she built the Nord Stream pipeline. But now whoever, their political class are just puppets. And that's what Putin keeps saying. Why is Europe going along with the imperialism of the United States and NATO, which is exactly what this is? So people don't know that's what this is. They think that all of a sudden Putin woke up one morning and decided to invade Ukraine and be a jerk.
No one said that.
And that's not what's happening. In fact, he's the one who's been pushing for peace.
No, this has been going on for a while. Do you think this was the start? Do you think this? Well, it began in 2022. Putin woke up one day. He had let's just say a bad cup of coffee that day, and it did not settle well in his stomach. And then at that point, he was like, you know what? I should probably I don't know, invade a sovereign country. You know what we're going to do? We'll do a special operation. I'll just basically set it up so it'll be 2 weeks tops. No biggie. And then what we're going to do is we just get in there. We annex a couple areas, make Russia a little bit bigger, restore some glory, tell the world that we're doing it because it's filled with Nazis. Everyone doesn't like Nazis, obviously. Nazis are the bad guys, and so they'll all go along with the whole show. And then, boom, 2 weeks in, 2 weeks out, end of story, easy done.
Talks. And there was a peace agreement in March. NATO sabotaged it because they don't want a peace agreement. They want to put an economic hurt on Russia, and they don't care how many Ukrainians get slaughtered to do it. The Ukrainians are just cannon fodder for an economic war pushed by the West and NATO.
You're familiar with the Qatar-Turkey pipeline?
Yeah.
Syria,
yes. That's what the Syrian war is about.
It's all interconnected. And I always phrase it this way because, I'm the milquetoast fence guy. I'll say the United States wanted to build a pipeline through Syria, through Turkey, into Europe to offset the Gazprom natural gas monopoly. And then Syria said no. Our ally Russia would not appreciate it if we allowed you to compete with them, and it would hurt hurt them economically. So Syria, Russia, Iran, they wanted to build an alternate pipeline that would tap the same gas field and send it up through Iraq and Turkey into Ukraine, into Europe, which would give Russia more control. And then I guess the United States just got really lucky. Somehow Syria fell into civil war. Yes. And of course we opposed Bashar al-Assad because of all the awful things he did.
Arab Spring, baby. That was the Arab Spring.
Oh yeah, yeah. Grab the mic. Yeah.
Just of course. Are you going to refresh history there? We're talking about someone who was coming off the heels of a dynasty. It's basically father, son. You know how everyone isn't really into the Nepo babies right now, or Nepo babies, sorry. It's a Nepo baby situation where all of a sudden there was a whole bunch of revolutions that were taking place during the Arab Spring, and they were largely facilitated through social media like Twitter. While this is occurring, there is one that begins in Syria, and that is quickly, and this is again people rebelling against an authoritarian leader, that is obviously quashed by Bashar al-Assad as he attempts to again restore authoritarian control over the country. Now, does America involve itself for the purposes of its own, let's just say, geopolitical interests? Of course, of fucking course. Guess what? Not only America, Russia too. Russia and America suddenly start to utilize that ground as a proxy war. It involves other countries and factions. It involves allies like the Kurds, for example. It involves a whole bunch of organizations, obviously, that we directly associate with terrorism and terrorist individuals. And it involves Russians and Americans both fueling a war going on in there for their own private interests. On both ends. That's how this all works. So you are correct in talking from a material perspective that there's obviously a bigger interest than whatever people say out loud. Like, we're no longer in the Crusades. Everything is not but for the glory of God. This is not to get into the kingdom of heaven, and everything we do at every single moment is but for our noble causes. It's, yes, there's a lot of corporate interests in controlling, manipulating, and dictating how energy is moved around, how power is controlled, how financial systems are controlled, and will continue to try and control and dominate as much power as possible and clash against each other. And there's multiple different ones. There's multiple different factions. The U.S. can be the biggest, without question. The U.S. and, the U.S. Imperial Corps, the largest on the planet. The U.S. military, most military bases. Fucking hundreds and hundreds of military bases globally. No one comes close. Not even a superpower like China. China builds, like, a military base in Djibouti, and all of a sudden everyone's like, whoa, shit, China's trying to conquer the world. And it's like, they got a lot of catching up to do. They got a lot of work to catch up to the good old U.S. of A. America's everywhere. It's well-positioned, it's well-stationed, it's well armed, it's well greased. The military-industrial complex dominates the fucking economy of the U.S. So they ain't going anywhere anytime soon. So here's my point in all this. instead of the team sports, instead of being like, you know what, Russia good, actually, they're doing a liberation project at the end of the day, and then America's the bad guy, or America good, because again, this whole spreading of democracy, American imperialism project, no, sorry, we'll use a different word, we'll use liberation, okay? We're trying to liberate other countries. It seems like, for the most part, it just fucks other places up. It just devastates them, all right? It's not as if Iraq now is infinitely better than it ever was before and more prosperous. Libya, yes, one of the richest countries in Africa, reduced to fucking thousands of people dying from water supplies being bombed by NATO forces. Like, this is not a decidedly good force for the world, but that doesn't mean they're the only actors, doesn't mean they're the only ones, doesn't mean, like, just because liberals are just 100% like their only vision is like Ukraine and the liberation of Ukraine, that's the only thing we can, just because that's the liberals' current focus right now, and a lot of the GOP, by the way, you'll notice that a lot of the GOP support the war effort as well, because this is ultimately about supporting the military-industrial complex. And yes, there are obviously ambitions that America has that it's looking for, but that doesn't mean that that takes away for a second the struggle of Ukrainians. You have to remember that there are Ukrainians fighting and dying and having war crimes committed against them because a foreign nation is trying to take parts of their country away. Like that suddenly doesn't cease just because also the United States does fucked up shit.
So, I mean, look, I don't trust it. Under Obama, ISIS is expanding rapidly. Yeah. And
we were funding them in Syria. You know that.
Well,
we killed the Ba'ath Party and created them.
It's air quote funding, right? We see these guys driving around in this truck. It wasn't ISIS, it was some other group. And it's like a truck from Detroit with some guy's phone number on it. How are they getting this equipment? Yes, the United States wanted Assad out, accused him of all the worst things in the world. And it's because we wanted to offset Gazprom's natural gas control. It's not an absolute monopoly, but it's a large control over it. Then Nord Stream 2 gets built, strengthening their distribution into Europe, and then it blows up, and the West goes, Russia did it. I'm like, oh yeah, Russia blew up their own gas pipeline. That makes sense.
They could have just turned off the gas.
Exactly.
They didn't have to blow it up. They could just go, no, we're turning off our gas. So none of this stuff makes fun. That's why Russiagate never made sense, right?
Well, thanks, Jake Toady.
Doing my part to advance the anti-white name genocide.
Oh, God. Oh, no. Now Lauren Southern's going to come by and ask what's going on.
They, even though CrowdStrike, anyway, it gets into the weeds. I don't
well, now they're saying that a lot of the stuff that pissed off Putin happened under Trump, as if to imply the war is his fault. And it's like, no. If that was true, Putin would have taken action during the Trump years, but he didn't.
To support your claim that NATO is an offensive pact, because it was supposed to be a defensive pact. Any country that gets invaded, all the other ones will defend. But it's like a tower rush, if you've ever played StarCraft or Warcraft, where you go as close to their base as you can, and then you start to build defensive towers all around their base. So if they try and leave their base, they get attacked by your defensive towers. So that's what we've done, is we've created an area of defensive outposts all around their land. What I think is happening is that the Russians, after the Soviet Union...
Look, I don't want to talk geopolitics. It's complex and difficult, but could you explain it in StarCraft? Is NATO doing a Zerg rush? Is that what's going down here? Because like I got a good proton base somewhere else, but I'm really worried about the nukes. They're going to drop them at any minute. So who's who here? Help me out.
Union fell, the oligarchs split it up so that the Russia didn't have access to the Black Sea. They didn't want them to have Mediterranean access because they didn't want to be a global hegemon economically. And now Putin's trying to take Sevastopol, Crimea, through annexation and force. He wants the Eastern Donbass. I don't know why it's not more plaintive. And I could see even like something where Zelensky comes out as a superhero fighting peace. Like he could be the guy that does it.
So the irony is that Zelensky ran on a...
So that almost sounded like Moonlord, my apologies to Weedlord, was trying to turn things around a little bit. It sounded like he was trying to be like, hey, by the way, I mean, like, just so we're clear, this is certainly pretty self-evident that he's trying to annex these regions and take them over.
Peace
has been for a while.
Right? He was going to bring peace to Ukraine. He was going to join everybody together again. He was a uniter. And then my theory of what happened was that the reason why he did the exact opposite, right? He's banned all opposition media. He's banned opposition political, all that stuff. He's done horrible stuff. He's become the worst kind of dictator.
Oh my God, he's become the worst guy. Like, look, I think two things. One, the liberal fawning over Zelensky, turning him into this like sex god cover of Vogue kind of shit. Cringe, obviously. Two, the support that Zelensky gets, comparable to any other force that is currently fighting the oppression of another nation trying to take away their sovereignty, is like there's nothing comparable. There's no speech by members of a Palestinian resistance movement at the UN or at the Academy Awards. We treat different things completely differently, and the suffering will support fucking Saudi Arabia as they're devastating Yemen, and at the same time we're going to make a whole bunch of criticism about whether or not people are properly supporting Ukraine. So all of those, they can be true. And I can have strong criticisms of Zelensky and currently a lot of the things that he's doing to erode, say, workers' rights and stuff like that. But I'm saving all of that for when they're not fucking being bombed. I'm saving that because this happens to be a leader of someone fighting an invading force. Like, yes, they're getting an incredible amount of, let's just say, proprietary treatment or special treatment compared to anyone else who's fighting this. That's very self-evident. You can point that out as well. But at the end of the day, like, this is still, again, people dying trying to defend their own home nation. It's like, it seems like a very simple thing from a leftist perspective that you'd want to support something against an imperial force. Like, what are we doing here?
But why would he do that? I think it was because NATO, he knows that if he goes against NATO, that they will kill him, and so will the right wing in his country, which are the Azov Battalion Nazis. Those people love it. I mean, I watch videos of these guys talking about how they love fighting and killing, and that these guys are the real deal Nazis. And they're, you know, I'm not saying that the majority of people in Ukraine are Nazis. I'm saying a big controlling factor of their military and their politics are.
No, this is all wrong. This is so easily debunkable. If you look at the last elections, the Democratic elections, which again were approved internationally, there wasn't like, oh, this was an actual real democracy. The actual Nazi party, the far-right fascistic party, got less than 2%. That the majority of the population is not voting for the far-right extremist party. There are far-right extremist parties that have better elections in countries in Europe than that. That's absolutely absurd. And yes, no question, the Azov Battalion are fucking Nazis, neo-Nazis. In fact, it's really fucked up that the stories used to focus on Ukraine for years and years and years about why are we arming and funding and training paramilitary groups and or organizations that do have direct ties to the Ukrainian defense system that are also neo-Nazis. That is an unavoidable reality that people have to acknowledge as a true thing. That is not the majority. You know, we're talking about the Azov Battalion is like a couple thousand individuals. They have been decimated in certain parts of Ukraine. I'm not saying that it's like, oh, this is a good thing. No, those are neo-Nazis. Absolutely zero support for them. They're absolutely disgusting individuals. There's neo-Nazis in Canada. There's neo-Nazis in America. There's lots of neo-Nazis in Canada and America. Obviously, they are luckily a minority of individuals, but that doesn't mean that other countries are absolved of that. That doesn't make every single person who lives in the country a neo-Nazi. That doesn't mean that if someone wanted to invade America right now and be like, well, I'm doing it because I got to purge America of its neo-Nazi problem, you'd be like, well, I don't think you have a right to roll in the tanks, and also you'll be destroyed pretty quickly.
Right-wing Nazis, and that's what's going on over there, and people don't know it. So they would threaten to kill Zelensky, and that's why Zelensky's doing all this crazy stuff, because he's got no option. What else is he going to do? So he became a good boy, meaning that he's going along. Now he's going to cut up his country and give it to BlackRock and all those people. And you saw that. So he says this is a great economic. Everything. It's always about money. These wars are always about. These are economic wars. The thing with China is an economic war.
And can it not be an economic war in the other direction? Do you think Russia and Russian energy interests, as well as Russian billionaires and oligarchs, aren't profiting immensely from this, while the average Russian and the Russian people and Russian workers suffer, especially under like all of these fucking all of the impositions that are put on them from other countries like the United States? Like, that directly impacts sometimes the poorest individuals who live in a country, not the people who it should. Like, yes, you can target specific individuals, you can target supply chains, you can target what kind of elements, transistors and stuff get into a country. That stuff you can do, but ultimately, yeah, when you do massive sanctions, it's going to hurt people. Like, you have to understand the reality of the situation.
Thing with Ukraine is an economic war. Libya was an economic war. He was trying to create a currency for Africa. You know that. And so anyway, go ahead.
We have a reporter, Alad Eliyahu. I think he was the one telling us about this because he's gone down to cover a lot of these pro-Ukraine events. Yeah. And he says these people will wave the Azov flag. They will wave overt Nazi symbols. It's not like they're waving swastikas or anything, but there's comparable or related symbols that they will wave around, and they don't care. And where's Antifa and these leftist organizations who oppose this to come out for some reason? No idea. And I'll tell you this, the funny thing, Antifa is an interesting thing. It's an idea, right? It's whatever it is, these people, whatever they're fighting. I'll tell you, they're not fighting as pro-Azov, pro-Nazi protesters, but they have beaten up guys who opposed restrictions and lockdowns, and they have shown up to attack people who are holding a free speech event. In DC, they were having an anti-big tech censorship rally. So you have protesters opposing corporate power, multinational corporations. Antifa shows up and attacks people. You had a small handful of people outside of a hospital protesting the lockdown measures they had put in place. Antifa shows up and starts beating up people. Then you have pro-Azov protesters celebrating this Nazi group, and they're nowhere to be found. Makes you wonder about their real goals.
And if it's even real, Antifa could be a false flag. Someone's like, I'm Antifa, let's do some damage.
But they
Antifa
claim that. They say anyone can be, so that's on them. That's their idea.
Whenever I see Antifa doing anything, I just think they're all feds. Whenever they're doing, I just think they're
Useful idiots and feds.
yeah. I don't.
Yeah, there was a story about some Antifa guy who gets arrested. You know, they grab him, they put him in a car, they drive him around, and then drop him off, and everyone's like, "How dare you arrest this guy?" And I'm like, "Oh yes, how strange that he got picked up by the cops, they drove him around, and then dropped him off again." That's what they do with their informants.
Yeah, that's right.
I want to talk to him in the car, say what's going on, and then drop him off.
This is my thing with the liberal economic order and the military-industrial complex. At first, I didn't know what it was, and then in 2007, I got red-pilled, and I was like, oh God, that's the enemy. And now I'm looking at the 5 of the 6 most valuable weapons manufacturers on Earth, you know, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, et cetera, the list goes on.
What did getting red pilled have to do with any of that? If you don't know, red pilling is obviously, you know, where you're going to learn about how the men's rights movement is effectively about how we are somewhat trapped in the matrix, and it's these women with their vaginas that are trying to control us all. But I guess it's all connected. It's all interconnected.
Do you enjoy the Serfs but prefer not to have to use your eyeballs? Many are saying this. Well, we've got the solution for you. It's the Serf Times in podcast form. Available on most major podcasting networks now. If you enjoy it, please consider leaving a good review and feedback because it really helps the show out, apparently, and it's free, just like the podcast.
To our gods, Xander Corvus and Peyton L. Juste, we shall spend many a generations building mighty cathedrals in your honor. To our monarch, Tom Spiker, we are but your oafish jesters, here to offer you a laugh at any opportunity. To our brave knights of the Round Table, Rachel K., Izzy Solidarity, Victoria Bell, Sebastian Demel, Mark Harmon, Benji Arnie, Scary Earth Human, Tony, DM Rivera, Resident Scarecrow, Sir Nickus, Cheryl Alvarez, Ruby Kelly, Brandon, Words Greenwood, Everything Important, Hegbert Celine, Matthew Scarborough, Stellar Vision, Ariane McCarthy, Doug Cady, Daniel Sutton, Jenna Tal, Dark Puppy, Quiet One 85, Anna Loves Riley, Omni, Riley and Anna, Poodlehawk, Multimondi, Trevbot EXE, Brian Ephraim, Anthropophojack, Catherine, Ramon Acosta, Incosin, Ralph Parler, Violent Orchard, Political Puppy, La Media Panza, Todd Buckingham, and Todd La Jeunesse. We salute our valiant heroes off to fight injustice everywhere.